I never thought my life could change overnight. My name is Michael Anderson and I work as a financial analyst for a large company in Boston. For the last 15 years I have been married to Sarah, the woman I thought was perfect. We have a beautiful 13-year-old daughter, Emily, who has always been the center of our universe. Our life was orderly and predictable. I woke up at 6:30 every morning, making breakfast for the family. It had been my little tradition since we got married. Sarah was usually down by 7 o'clock, impeccably dressed for her job at an advertising agency, and Emily was the last one to arrive, always struggling with sleep and the rush before school. We lived in a cozy 2-story house in the suburbs of Boston. The area was considered one of the best in the city, especially because of the prestigious private school that Emily attended. Sarah and I worked hard to afford such an education for our daughter. Each month, a significant part of our budget was spent on tuition, but we considered it an important investment in the future. The first changes in our lives began so imperceptibly that I can't even say exactly when they happened. Perhaps it all began in September when Emily's school got a new math teacher, Mr. Parker. James Parker, as he introduced himself at a parent-teacher meeting, was a young professional who had recently moved from California. Tall, athletic, with a friendly smile and an impressive track record, he immediately made a good impression on the PTA. Sarah took a special interest in Emily's school activities during this period. Previously, I usually attended parent-teacher conferences since her work schedule was less flexible. But suddenly she began rearranging her schedule to attend all school events. At that time, I was only happy about her involvement in my daughter's education. Emily had also changed from a girl who disliked math to an enthusiast of the subject. Her grades improved noticeably, and Sarah and I were very pleased. Our daughter often stayed after school for extra tutoring with Mr. Parker, and we considered this a great opportunity for her academic growth. Sarah began staying late at work more often than usual. At first it was once or twice a week, then it became almost every day. She attributed it to a new important project, and I saw no reason to doubt it. After all, we were both successful professionals, and each of us had periods of increased busyness. Our family dinners became less frequent. We got together mostly on weekends. Sarah seemed distracted, checking her phone often and sometimes retreating to talk, explaining that it was work-related. I noticed these little things, but I attributed them to stress and fatigue. We had been married for 15 years, we had a wonderful family, a nice house, a stable life. What doubts could there be? On those rare evenings when we were alone, Sarah was unusually silent. She could sit for hours with a book or a laptop, lost in her thoughts. When I tried to discuss something with her, she answered in monosyllables, often citing fatigue or a headache. Our intimacy had changed, too. It became more mechanical, as if an obligation rather than a desire. I began to notice other little things: a new perfume, more elaborate makeup, new clothes. Sarah had always taken care of herself, but now she paid special attention to her appearance. She began going to the gym in the mornings, although before she preferred evening workouts. On weekends, she increasingly found reasons to go somewhere, either a meeting with friends or an unscheduled work meeting. If someone had asked me back then if I was happy in my marriage, I would have answered yes without hesitation. Despite all these small changes, I still believed that we had the perfect family. Perhaps it was this blind faith that prevented me from seeing the obvious earlier. But that Tuesday was to change everything. My first serious suspicions arose in early December. By that time, Sarah's odd behavior had become so obvious that I could no longer ignore it. It all started with a parent-teacher conference that we were supposed to attend together, but Sarah insisted on going alone, citing that she wanted to discuss some sensitive issues with the teachers regarding Emily. That evening, I overheard Sarah on the phone. She was speaking in a hushed voice in our bedroom, thinking I was still in the garage. "James, we need to be careful." "Yes, I know." "No, he doesn't suspect anything." These fragments of phrases were etched into my memory. Then I tried to convince myself that it could have been about some surprise for the upcoming Christmas or about Emily's school affairs. But the following weeks only reinforced my doubts. Sarah began to mention Mr. Parker more often in conversations, and always in an offhand way, as if she was trying to make it seem natural. "Well, James, that is, Mr. Parker, was talking at the meeting. You know Mr. Parker suggested an interesting program of extracurricular activities." There was a special note in her voice when she said his name. I began to analyze the last few months, remembering every detail. Sarah had indeed been coming to Emily's school more often. In addition to parent-teacher conferences, she had volunteered to help organize school events, although she had never shown such enthusiasm before. Every Thursday she stayed late, explaining that it was because of PTA meetings. But when I called other parents one day, it turned out that there were no regular meetings on Thursdays. Her phone was now always with her, protected by a new password. We had never had secrets from each other before, we knew each other's passwords, but now she was much more secretive. One evening, while Sarah was taking a shower, I noticed her phone vibrating insistently. A message from James P. appeared on the screen, just a few words, but they made my heart skip a beat. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. At that moment, I felt the ground slip out from under my feet. Sure, it could have been an innocent message about a meeting about Emily's grades, but something inside me told me that it was much more serious. I began to notice how Sarah primped before parent-teacher conferences, put on new underwear, used a special perfume, the same one she used to save for our special evenings. Emily had changed too, but in a different way. She became more withdrawn, talked less about school. When I asked about math classes and Mr. Parker, she was reluctant to answer, although before she had enthusiastically shared all the school news. Now I understand that she may have noticed or suspected something but did not know how to talk about it. I started checking Sarah's accounts. She was using cash more often than her card. Mysterious appointments with vague names like consultation or client meeting appeared on her calendar. When I called her office during one of these meetings, the secretary said Sarah had left early. In January, I noticed that she began coming home with a subtle masculine scent on her clothes. She attributed it to the cramped office and close contact with coworkers, but the scent was always the same. At a parent-teacher conference in mid-January, I smelled the same scent as I passed Mr. Parker. Our own relationship became increasingly strained. Sarah avoided intimacy, always finding some excuse, tiredness, a headache, and early morning the next day. When we were together, she seemed distant, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. Our conversations became superficial, mostly about household trivia and Emily's affairs. I started tracking the time she came home, recording odd behavior, collecting inconsistencies in her stories. Part of me hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. Paranoia began to eat me up from the inside. I began to sleep poorly, constantly running through different scenarios in my head, trying to find innocent explanations for everything that was happening. In early February, I decided to follow her. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stand the suspense any longer. That Thursday, I said I was going on a business trip, but I actually stayed in town. I parked my car near the school and waited. School ended at 3:30 p.m., but Sarah stayed in the building. An hour later, most of the teachers had left, but her car was still in the parking lot. There was only one car nearby, Mr. Parker's silver Ford. After that night at the school, I couldn't work normally. My imagination painted the most terrible pictures and I felt like I was slowly going crazy. I took Friday off, telling Sarah that I had to go to an important meeting in New York. In fact, I stayed home, hiding my car in the garage of my neighbor Tom, who was away for the weekend and kindly agreed to help, no questions asked. I knew what I was doing was wrong. 15 years of marriage built on trust, and now I was hiding in my own home like a thief. But I had to know the truth. Sarah had left for work at 8:30 that day, as usual. Emily had left on the school bus at 7:45. She had a class trip to the Natural History Museum and wasn't due back until the evening. I spent the entire day in agonizing anticipation. I tried to work remotely, but I couldn't concentrate. At 2 p.m., Sarah texted me, "Going to be late again today. Important client presentation. Don't expect me for dinner." I responded as usual, "Okay, good luck with the presentation." My hands were shaking as I typed those words. At 3:30 p.m., I saw her car pull into the driveway. I was in my second-floor office with a good view of the street. Sarah got out of the car, but she wasn't alone. James Parker was with her. They were talking, laughing. He was carrying some folders, maybe school papers, but I knew it was just a cover. They entered the house. I heard Sarah speaking in an exaggerated, deliberate voice, "Let's review Emily's progress in my home office." Her voice sounded fake, forced. I heard their footsteps on the first floor, then the sound of her office door opening. Muffled voices could be heard for a few minutes. Then everything went quiet. I waited. The minutes dragged on like hours. After a while, I heard them coming up the stairs. Sarah said something about other documents in the bedroom. My heart was about to jump out of my chest. I stood outside my office door, motionless, barely breathing. They walked past my office into our bedroom. The door closed. I heard muffled voices, laughter, then the sound of kisses. At that moment, something inside me broke. 15 years of marriage, thousands of evenings together, hundreds of plans for the future. Everything was crumbling in an instant. I stood outside the office door for a few more minutes. gathering my strength. Every sound from the bedroom was like a knife stab. Finally, I quietly walked out into the hallway and walked up to the bedroom door. It wasn't completely closed. Through the crack, I could see them on our bed, where Sarah and I had slept for the last 15 years, where we hugged, made plans, dreamed of the future. I pushed the door. It opened silently, like a nightmare. They didn't even notice me at first. They were so engrossed in each other. Sarah was lying on the bed, her blouse unbuttoned. James was hovering over her, his shirt on the floor. They were kissing each other more passionately than Sarah and I had in years. "What the hell is going on here?" I said, my voice surprisingly calm, even though I was seething inside. They pulled away from each other as if they'd been scalded. Sarah went pale, her eyes wide with horror. James froze like a deer in headlights. "Michael, we." Sarah tried to say something, frantically buttoning her blouse. James grabbed his shirt from the floor, his hands shaking. "Mr. Anderson, I can explain," he began, but I raised my hand, stopping him. "Explain? What exactly do you want to explain, Mr. Parker? How you fuck my wife in my bed? Or how you use my daughter as a cover for your meetings?" I felt the rage rising in waves inside me. "Get out of my house. Now." James quickly pulled on his shirt, grabbed his things, and practically ran out of the room. I heard him coming down the stairs, the front door slamming, his car starting. All the while, Sarah was sitting on the bed, her face in her hands. "How long?" I asked, as the sound of the engine faded. "What?" She looked up at me, her eyes watering. "How long has this been going on?" My voice shook with suppressed emotion. 3 months, she whispered. "Michael, I didn't mean to. It just happened." Happened? Nothing just happens, Sarah. You made choices. Every time you lied to me about PDA meetings. Every time you made up another business trip or late meeting. Every time you came home with his scent on your clothes. Those were conscious decisions. I stood by the window, looking out onto the street where, just a few hours ago, the car of the man who had destroyed my family had been parked. And Emily? Have you thought about her? About how this will affect her? Her math teacher is fucking her mother perfect for school gossip. "Emily doesn't know anything," Sarah said quickly. "We've been very careful." I laughed bitterly. Careful? So careful that we brought him into our house? Into our bedroom? Where our daughter does her homework? Where we watch movies as a family on the weekends? Sarah cried harder. "I love him, Michael. I didn't plan it, I swear. It just happened. He understands me, listens to me. And me? For 15 years I didn't understand you? Didn't listen to you? Didn't love you?" My voice broke. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah went to her sister's, taking a small bag of things. I was left alone in our large house, where every single thing reminded me of 15 years of marriage. The photographs on the walls that now seemed like a mocking mockery, a happy family, a loving spouse, a perfect life. It was all a lie. At 6:30 p.m., Emily returned from the excursion. She was in high spirits, talking about the museum, about dinosaurs, about how great she had spent time with her friends. I listened to her, trying to smile, but inside I was cringing at the thought that I would soon have to explain to her why my mother was not home. "Dad, where's Mom?" she finally asked, noticing the unusual silence in the house. "Mom. She went to see Aunt Jessica. She needed to discuss something important." I tried to speak calmly, but my voice was treacherous. Emily looked at me carefully. At 13, she was surprisingly perceptive. "Something happened, huh?" I sat down on the couch and patted the one next to me, inviting her to sit. "Emily, we need to talk. This is not going to be an easy conversation, but you're old enough to understand." She sat down next to me, her face serious. "This is about Mom and Mr. Parker, right?" Her words caught me off guard. You knew." Emily looked down. "Not really, but I saw the way they talked after school. The way Mom looked at him. And the other kids noticed too. Sarah Johnson said she saw them together at the cafe at the mall." My heart sank. Not only did my daughter know what was going on, she was forced to listen to the school gossip about it. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Emily hugged me and I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. "You have nothing to apologize for, baby. It wasn't your fault." We spent the next few hours talking. Emily told me how the atmosphere in her classroom had changed since the rumors started. How some students had started whispering behind her back. How she had stopped raising her hand in math class because she was afraid of drawing attention to herself. I listened and felt a cold rage building inside me. Not only had they ruined our marriage, but they had made my daughter's life miserable at school. Sarah called in the evening. She wanted to talk to Emily, but our daughter refused to answer the phone. "Tell her I love her," Sarah's voice trembled. "You know, Sarah, now is not the best time to make such statements," I answered and hung up. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in our bedroom where I'd found them earlier in the day and thought about how everything had gone wrong. I thought about our first date, the proposal, the wedding, Emily's birth. 15 years of marriage flashed before my eyes like frames from an old movie. I remembered how we bought this house. It needed some work, but we were so happy that it was our home. Every weekend we were remodeling, decorating, planning. Sarah was gardening, I was building a gazebo. We were a team. In the morning, I called the school and informed them that Emily would be out of class for a while. The secretary started to say something about the importance of continuous learning, but I interrupted her. My wife was caught in bed with her math teacher. "I think my daughter deserves a little break." There was silence on the other end of the line. An hour later, the school principal called. He was extremely concerned about the situation and assured me that Mr. Parker would be suspended immediately until all the circumstances were clarified. "We will not tolerate this type of behavior in our school," he said. "It violates all ethical and professional standards." Sarah's parents arrived for dinner. They were shocked by the news. Her father, George, an old-school man, was furious. "How could she do that? To a teacher? In your own home?" He paced the living room, clenching and unclenching his fists. Her mother, Elizabeth, simply cried, hugging Emily. "Michael, what are you going to do?" George finally asked. I looked at Emily, who was huddled next to her grandmother. "I'm filing for divorce. And Emily and I are moving. I've already contacted a realtor and we'll be looking for a new house. Far away from here, in a different neighborhood. We'll support whatever you decide," Elizabeth said. "You've always been a good husband and father." "Sarah, she made a terrible mistake." I nodded, unable to respond. It felt strange to be receiving support from the parents of the woman who had just destroyed our family. That evening, a text came from Sarah. "We need to talk. About the future, about the divorce, about Emily." I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. "All communication is through lawyers. I'll hire mine tomorrow. I advise you to do the same." That night, Emily and I slept in the living room. She didn't want to go upstairs and I couldn't bring myself to go back to that bed. We laid out the couch, put on an old superhero movie she loved as a kid, and tried to pretend it was just another Friday night. But we both knew nothing would ever be the same again. A month passed. Emily and I moved into a new house in Brookline, a quiet suburb half an hour from our old place. A small but cozy house with 3 bedrooms and a backyard where Emily was already planning her first garden. The new life began slowly, creaking like an old door on unoiled hinges, but it began. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Sarah didn't argue with my terms. Perhaps her guilt had gotten the better of her. My attorney, Mark Steinberg, was an excellent lawyer. He advised me to document all evidence of the affair, including the school official's testimony. In Massachusetts, adultery is still an aggravating circumstance in divorce, he explained. James Parker was fired from his school. As I later learned, this was not the first time he had had inappropriate relationships with parents of students. There had been a scandal at his previous school in California that had been hushed up. Now his teaching license was in question. I didn't care. Let the education systems of different states deal with this predator themselves. Emily transferred to a new school. The first weeks were tough, new staff, new teachers, the need to catch up on the curriculum. But gradually she adapted. At the new school, no one knew our history. There were no sidelong glances or whispers behind our backs. She even made new friends, especially close with a girl named Rachel, who also came from a family of divorced parents. Sarah tried to mend fences with her daughter, but Emily still wasn't ready to talk. Every time Sarah called, Emily found an excuse not to answer the phone. "I don't hate her," my daughter once told me. I don't know how to talk to her anymore. I didn't pressure her to decide when she was ready. At work, I was completely immersed in a new project. My boss, upon learning of the situation, asked me to lead the development of a new financial model for a major client. "You need something to keep your mind occupied," he said, "and I know you're the best analyst on the team." This was exactly what I needed. A challenging task that required my full concentration. We spent evenings together with Emily. Cooked dinner. She suddenly became interested in cooking, especially baking. Did homework. I taught math myself now. Fortunately, my financial education allowed me to help even with advanced algebra. Watched movies, read books, just talked. We became closer than ever. Sarah's parents visited us regularly. They did not betray Emily and me, as I had initially feared. "You are our son, no matter what Sarah did," George told me. Elizabeth helped with the new house, brought home-cooked meals, and tutored Emily. Their support was invaluable. Emily and I went to a psychologist together. Dr. Rachel Greenberg specialized in family trauma and working with adolescents. "You're both going through a major loss," she said at our first session. "And it's not just the family that's broken. You've lost trust, confidence in the future, a sense of security. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." The sessions with Dr. Greenberg helped. Emily became less withdrawn, more open about her feelings. I was learning to be both a father and a mother, learning to cope with my own pain without projecting it onto my daughter, learning to live anew. One evening, as we were sitting in the backyard planning our garden, Emily suddenly said, "You know, Dad, I'm glad we moved. It's easier to breathe here." I hugged her, feeling a lump in my throat. "Yes, honey, it really is easier." Sarah had moved in with James. I learned this from her sister Jessica, who called to warn me. "They plan to get married when the divorce is finalized," she said apologetically. I thanked her for the information and hung up. Oddly, the news evoked almost no emotion in me. It was as if she were talking about strangers. My friends tried to set me up with different women, but I wasn't ready. "Give me time," I said. "I need to figure myself out first." The truth was I was afraid. Afraid to trust someone again. Afraid to make a mistake again. Afraid it would affect Emily. Dr. Greenberg said that was normal. That kind of trauma doesn't heal quickly. I signed the final divorce papers in Mark's office on a sunny April morning. 15 years of marriage had been condensed into a few sheets of legal text. As I walked out of the building, I took a deep breath of the spring air. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. That evening, Emily and I sat in our new kitchen, eating a pizza she had baked herself, her first completely independent culinary experiment. "Dad," she said, looking thoughtfully at her slice, "we can do this, right?" I looked at my daughter, so strong, so wise beyond her years, and smiled. "Yeah, baby, we can do this." It's been a year since I signed the divorce papers. A lot has changed in that time. Emily and I's Brookline home has gone from being a place to a family. The backyard we'd spent the summer working on has blossomed. Emily is a talented gardener. Her tomato and cucumber beds have produced so many that we've shared with the neighbors. Emily settled into her new school. Her grades returned to their previous levels, and even improved in some subjects. She especially excelled in biology. Perhaps gardening had sparked her interest in science. Her friendship with Rachel grew into a strong bond. The girls were inseparable, often staying overnight at each other's houses, preparing lessons together, and making plans for the future. Things were slowly improving with Sarah, though not in the way she might have hoped. Emily agreed to spend one day every 2 weeks with her mother. They went shopping, went to the movies, just walked and talked. Sarah really tried to rebuild her daughter's trust. She divorced James 6 months after their wedding. As it turned out, his attraction to the parents of his students had not disappeared with the move to a new school in New Hampshire. At work, my project was incredibly successful. The new financial model I developed attracted the attention of several large clients. I was offered a promotion. Now I headed an entire department of financial analysis. The higher salary allowed Emily and me to travel. We visited the West Coast, explored national parks, spent a week in Hawaii. Our sessions with Dr. Greenberg became less frequent, once a month instead of weekly. She felt that we had both made significant progress in overcoming the trauma. "You have built a healthy relationship with each other," she said in one of our final sessions. And that is the most important achievement. Slowly, romance began to creep back into my life. I met Laura at a financial planning conference in Chicago. She was a financial consultant from Boston, divorced, with 2 children. We started out as professional connections that gradually grew into something more. Laura understood my situation and didn't rush things. We met once a week, just had dinner and talked. Sometimes we went to the theater or concerts. Emily was cautiously interested in Laura's arrival in my life. She seems normal, my daughter said after our first meeting, which was the highest praise I could hope for in this situation. Gradually, they began to communicate, too. Laura helped Emily prepare for math Olympiads. It turned out that she had majored in higher mathematics in college. Sarah's parents remained an important part of our lives. George and Elizabeth came over every weekend, bringing home-cooked meals and helping with the garden. To Emily, they were loving grandparents, and to me, family I didn't want to lose. You know, Michael, George said one day as he helped me mend a fence. Sometimes family isn't the people you're related to by blood or marriage, it's the ones who stick around when everything else falls apart. At school, Emily joined a gardening club. Together with other students, they created a school garden where they grew vegetables for the school cafeteria. Her passion expanded to include ecology, sustainability, and organic farming. Dad, I think I know what I want to be, she said one night over dinner. I want to study agronomy and organic farming. My fears and insecurities gradually receded. I no longer woke up in the middle of the night with nightmares, checked Emily's phone, or panicked when she stayed late at a friend's. Trust was returning in people, in life, in the future. As Dr. Greenberg said, trauma never goes away, but we learn to live with it, turning it into a source of strength and wisdom. Laura introduced me to her children, Jake, 15, and Sophia, 11. They were smart, well-mannered kids. Jake was into computer programming, and Sophia was into rhythmic gymnastics. Gradually, we began to spend time together, having picnics, going on hikes, playing board games. Emily became especially close with Sophia. They often shared secrets about their own things. A new tradition emerged in our house, Sunday dinners, where everyone gathered. Emily and I, Laura and the kids, Sarah's parents, and sometimes Rachel and her parents. We cooked together using vegetables from our garden. After dinner, the adults drank coffee and talked, while the children played in the garden or did their own chores. Sarah started a new life after her divorce from James. She moved to Seattle, where she got a job at a major advertising agency. We maintained a polite relationship for Emily's sake. She regularly video called her daughter, sent gifts for the holidays. Emily gradually thawed, although full forgiveness had not yet occurred. A year after my divorce, I realized something important. Sometimes what seems like the end of everything is the beginning of something new. Sarah's betrayal destroyed our family, but from those pieces, Emily and I built a new life, maybe even a better one than before. We became stronger, wiser, learned to value real relationships and understand that family is not always those who are related by marriage or blood. Emily had also matured during the year. At 14, she displayed remarkable wisdom and maturity. You know, Dad, she said to me one evening while we were working in the garden, I used to think that a happy family was when everything was perfect, like in the movies. But now I realize that happiness is when people stay together no matter what, support each other, and continue to grow. I looked at my daughter, our blooming garden, our home that had become a real refuge, and I realized we really did it. Life goes on, and it's beautiful even if it doesn't go according to the original plan.